Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be a Q&A, and I asked you guys to ask me questions on my community tab, and I also got some questions on Tumblr, so this video is going to cover all of them. They are arranged from writing related questions, writing degree related questions, and just general questions. So the first question is, how much work do you do on an excerpt/chapter before you let Sarah read it, your followers? And this is actually a really interesting question. So the answer is pretty similar for both. I actually share a lot of first drafts. I write pretty cleanly, I think, I would hope, on the first go. I'm not a very super fast drafter or anything. As a matter of fact, a lot of the excerpts I share on my blog are actually first drafts. If not, they have very minor tweaks with some word choice. I often won't share parts that I don't like, and sometimes though I will rework something in a Tumblr post that I'm posting, and so I have to copy that edited version into the document. And so this really depends, but it's basically the same for both Sarah, who is my sister, for those of you who do not know, and we are basically critique partners, but we're just like twins, so we share all of our work with each other. It really is the same level of editing that I do when I share my work with her and also Tumblr, mostly because I kind of edit as I go. By the time I share, it is technically kind of like a first draft. Sarah sometimes will get what I write fresh off the press. Sometimes we'll text each other what we've just written, and I'll just do that sentence by sentence, and I usually do that when I'm not feeling good about writing, and that's a good way to hype yourself up. Sometimes she gets it fresh off the press, but for the most part you guys are seeing the exact same thing. The next question is, how does your summer writing process / routine differ from that of the school year? Which do you prefer? And so the routine basically differs because there is none during the school year, and in general I'm a pantser, and I also don't stick to a very strict regimen when it comes to my writing in general. And so this summer I didn't really have set days that I would write, set hours that I write. What the summer gives me that the school year doesn't is time. And so I have all the time in the world to decide when I want to write. I don't write every single day in the summer. Despite that, I will go long stretches of weeks without writing any words, and that's just kind of a normal part of the process for me, not really stressing too much about writing every single day. And I would like to write a little bit more in the summer, but honestly most of the times I write about the same amounts that I do during the school year and during the summer. I find for me the concept of time causes a lot more stress than it does help. So for example, when I'm in school, I might be so desperate to write because I'm so stressed with my assignments that I will write at any given moment and I don't care. Whereas during the summer, I have so much time that I just don't feel inclined to write a lot. And so I do write about the same during the summer and during the school year, which is kind of interesting. A lot of people might have it oppositely, but I find the concept of tighter deadlines and sort of having to fit writing in actually motivates me to write more. Lucky me though, I am a writing major, so a lot of my degree is writing, and so the routine during the school year is that I write for school and I probably don't write my personal projects as much. That's what I found, at least in the first semester of my first year, which was last year. I didn't really write as much in my personal projects because I was writing stuff for school pretty constantly. Which do I prefer? I think I prefer the summer, but just because school stresses me out in general, and so I don't really like the school year. I like the routine, but I think because I'm in summer vacation mode right now, the prospect of going back to school is kind of terrifying and also a bit uncomfortable. And so generally I prefer the summer, but at the same time, I think I appreciate writing a lot more during the school year. The next question is, have you written novels besides the Fostered series? Will you ever publish one of them? Yes, I have. I have an entire video covering all of my novels. It's a little bit outdated, so it doesn't cover Moth Work, but for the most part, it covers every single one of my novels, especially my earlier works. And so I've written 3 novels outside of the Fostered series. For those of you who don't know, I have been writing a series called The Fostered series that I started when I was 13, so 5.5-ish years ago, and it is currently on I'm going to write the 7th book in the main series, and I'm currently on the 2nd book in the spin-off, so there are 9 books so far in that series. It's kind of crazy. It's gone through a whole transformation of genre, of age category, a whole bunch of stuff like that. As for the novels that I've written outside of that, I wrote most of them when I was much younger. The first one was the first novel I'd ever written, called Perks and Drawbacks. Check out that video if you want to learn more about these projects. That was a young adult contemporary. Definitely don't want to publish that. The second was a novel called This Is Where the End Starts. It's also a young adult contemporary, and it is about this girl whose character, she's a writer, her character comes to life, and they kind of like have a friendship kind of thing going on. That one was really cute. And then the third book, which is also a young adult contemporary, I'm realizing that all of the books outside of the Fostered series are young adult contemporary, was a novel called I'm Disappointed, and I actually worked really hard on that novel. It went through 10 drafts, and I was actually trying to get it published. I was in multiple contests for it, and I tried my best with that one. I wrote it when I was 14. It is about this kid named Clifford, who is very angsty. Check out the video if you want to learn more about him. I wrote that when I was 14, so it's quite old, and I'm no longer seeking publication. So essentially, no, I'm not seeking any publication for any of my novels right now. None of the Fostered novels will ever be published. There might be potential in the future if I ever write a book that can stand alone. I don't really plan long-term like my writing like that, but none of the Fostered books will ever be published. You can't read them. If you want to read what I'm currently writing, so Moth Work, which is the spin-off, I have writing updates on my blog that go chapter by chapter, and if you go on the book tab page for the projects, it'll like neatly link you to every single chapter, and you can read along essentially. It's not the whole chapters, but it's pretty close. And so I'm doing that for book 1 of the spin-off, which is Moth Work, and then book 2, which is Feeding Habits. So I will link those pages down below. I'm just not really interested in publishing my work. Those novels that I wrote outside of Fostered are really old. I wrote them when I was very young, turning 19 in September. So they are not works that I'm really interested in publishing. I'm Disappointed was the closest one, but it never even got to like a querying stage or anything. And it's not something I'm interested in doing right now, mostly because I no longer write young adult. So it just doesn't make sense for me to write young adult or to try to publish young adult. There's nothing wrong with young adult. I love young adult, but it's not the category I write anymore. I write adult literary fiction, and so that's the brand I've been trying to culminate for myself lately, and so it just wouldn't make sense. The next question is, what's the most surprising thing you've realized about your characters, themes, or story in general while discovery writing? This is pretty hard to answer because this is like all I've ever done. Like pantsing, discovery writing is all I've ever done. So it's kind of hard to nail down exactly since that's been my process since I started writing. I've never been very good at outlines. I don't like them very much. They kind of remove something from my writing, and that's how I know it doesn't really work for me. For me, it kind of desensitizes my writing. Not saying it does that for everybody. I know a lot of people find a lot of help in outlining, but for me it does desensitize the writing, and so it becomes a bit difficult to tap into imagery, to tap into emotion, to tap into tone, and those are things that very much shape my writing, and so I have to stray away from outlines. I quickly learned this though in my writing process from a very young age. It's that the story is the boss, and the story wants what it wants. For me, no amount of planning will ever define a character. It will never define a plot. It will never define any kind of story. What actually defines a story, in my experience, is writing the story. And so that's because in my head, stories are breathing figments. They are alive and they want what they want. Some writers feel like they have control over everything. And if you're one of those writers, I'm jealous of you. I wish I had control over my story, what the characters want. But for me, when I get an idea, it belongs to me because it's my idea, but it also sort of has its own higher power. I know this might sound bizarre to some of you, but for me, the story does have its own control. It has autonomy. And when I'm not following the path it wants, it signals that to me because something won't work. And obviously I am the writer and I'm in control of what I'm writing, but I've explained this a few times on my YouTube channel. Writing to me is not like a linguistic activity. It's not really anything rooted in language, actually. It's more a artistic activity where I see like I have a block of soapstone and I am chiseling away at that soapstone, and the more I write, the more I follow my muse, the more that sculpture starts to come out. It's less about typing words and it's more about uncovering. And That's why I love discovery writing, because it's literally discovering the sculpture. And that's why I can't outline, because outlining would mean that I already have the sculpture and like I don't really know what to do with that. I can't really like add anything to it when I outline, and that's why I've had to like not do that anymore, because I did really pressure myself to do that when I was younger. Allowing the story to breathe, allowing the story to be what it wants, that's what surprised me. I learned it very early on though, because I've been pantsing from the beginning that no matter what you do, the story wants what it wants. And that's how my 1-book fostered series turned into a 9-book series, because the story wants what it wants and I'm gonna let it happen. If it makes me happy, if I want to write it, then I'm totally okay with letting the story do what it wants. This also, I guess, applies to what a story wants to be. So sometimes a story wants to be a novel, sometimes it wants to be a short story, sometimes it wants to be a poem. And so a concept might not work for everything, and that's why like sort of listening to your work, kind of being in tune with the language and letting it speak to you as well is really important to my process. That sounds like really lofty, but I hope that makes sense to some of you who may feel the same way. This is like a really good example. In Feeding Habits, one of the main characters, Eliza, who you can learn more about in the Moth Work, All About My novel, she was actually supposed to be a very kind woman who's very supportive of Lonan, who is another main character in Moth Work, and she was supposed to kind of uplift his mental health and make him feel better. And then she's just very much the opposite. She's conniving, she's manipulative, she is needy, and she will do anything to get her way. And so no matter how much I wanted Eliza to be who I'd conceptualized her to be, she turned into somebody else, and it took the story in a different direction, but I'm happy about it. It feels a lot more organic, it feels more natural, and so I really truly love letting the story be what it wants to be. The next question is, what do you think makes a good story? And I think this all comes down to character. I think character and concept are two things that are sort of intertwined. A good concept is very interesting, but a good concept will not work without a character. And a good character, I think, on the other hand, can carry a story that doesn't have a stronger concept. But I think the best stories sort of meld these two things together. It doesn't have to be the highest concept story ever, but a story that you can sort of describe in 1 or 2 sentences, and it has strong character relationships, a strong character, a strong narrative. That's, I think, what makes a good story. And all of my favorite short stories really delve into some really interesting character work, and that's what I try to do with my own short stories. I write literary fiction, like I said, and so literary fiction in general is a little bit more character driven. I know that the definition used to be that literary fiction is character driven, genre is plot driven. Literary fiction can also have plot to it too, but the reason why I love literary fiction so much is the freedom it kind of gives me to focus in on character a little bit more and allow the character to enhance their own story. I could read a really boring or like cliche concept if the character was lovely, and that's honestly kind of my policy when it comes to short fiction. I try my best to create and write well-rounded, interesting people. The next question is, do you have any stories or poems that you stopped working on and that you don't see a future for? Do you want to tell us what they were about and why you stopped working on them? So I have a few. The first one I'm going to talk about is a short story. It was the first short story I'd ever tried to write, called Music for Poltergeists. And this story, I can't really exactly remember, but I think it was about this girl named Orla who is struggling with her mother's death, and she tries to like summon her mother with like a Ouija board, or like she tries to talk to her somehow with a Ouija board. And that story, I kind of stopped writing it. I have a writing update for it where I shared some of the excerpts, which I'll link because they're pretty cool. It wasn't really working, to be honest. I couldn't nail down the concept very much. I didn't understand the structure of short fiction. I was approaching short fiction like I would a novel, and no matter how much I was trying to simplify it, I was overcomplicating things, because short fiction really does require this complex understanding of simplicity. And if you write short fiction, you might understand what I'm saying. But Music for Poltergeists wasn't working because of the structure. The inciting incident didn't exist. I didn't know what the story was about. I was just kind of writing an interaction and some random flashbacks, and that's not really a short story. And that makes sense. It was my first short story. I don't think I will continue it, and that's why I don't think it has a future, and mostly because A, the structure is kind of wacky, and B, it's kind of similar to another short story I've already written called Phantom Limbs, and the character's pretty similar, and the situation is kind of similar, like both of them have a dead mother, there's some haunting vibes, and so I'm not really sure I will continue it in the same way, but I may switch up the concept a little bit, and hopefully that may change things. The next one is a story I started called Growing Season, and this one's kind of sad, because this is a really cool short story concept, where a woman replaces her ex-boyfriend, who has just broken up with her, with a cactus, and it's in the point of view of the cactus, and it's actually really funny. I wrote like a good 2 or so pages, like single-spaced, so like maybe about 1,000 words or a little less of the story, and it has a really fun voice. The problem is it's a very bizarre concept, and it's kind of hard to make those concepts work for longer than like a page or two without it getting a bit repetitive or too rigorous to work into. The next story is called The Window of a Stranger's House, and this is actually the first short story idea I've ever gotten. I never wrote the story, and I think it's mostly because I don't have a very strong concept, but it is a good title. And because it's a good title, I usually write my short stories based on whether or not they have good titles. That's the T. That actually I think is a really cool title. Essentially, it's about this really nosy woman named Lisa who spies on her neighbors. Like, they're a couple. I probably got the idea when I had just started grade 12, and I never actually ended up drafting anything from the story because I didn't have a really solid concept for that one. But I think it is kind of neat. Lisa seems a little unhinged, and I love writing with unhinged women, so I might write something in that point of view. It seems like a salty story, though. The title's really good, so I can't really let it go to waste, you know? Like, the last few short stories I've written have been written solely on title ideas. Like, The Species is Dead basically came from the title. Slaughter the Animal came from the title. And then Blink Twice for Final Judgment, also from the title. So titles are very important to my process, and so if I can finish that one, that would be really neat because I like the title on that one. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is a poem I started last year called Ear. It is kind of like a tribute to Van Gogh while also being about backwards words. It's kind of bizarre. I can't really explain my poetry. I had just gotten started into poetry, and this was like my second real poem. I'd written an entire chapbook before this, but this was like an actual poem I felt was more in line with like the poetic form and stuff, and I was finding a style. But I never actually ended up finishing it, and I don't think I will because it's a little bit dumb and too weird, I think, even for me. The next question is, what do you like about being a writing major and what do you not like about it? So what do I like about being a writing major? I like that I get to study what I love. I love that I have the support from my family. I love that I can get a degree in the arts. I love that my education is paid for now. And I love the community. So I'm not only a writing major, I go to a school where the writing community I think is quite booming in comparison to where I live. My favorite thing, I think, is the community aspect. I haven't started, obviously, like workshops and stuff yet because I just finished my first year. Workshops are like in second year and beyond. For now, my favorite thing is like the sense of community and getting to explore my passion, even when it's not something that I particularly want to be employed in or have plans to be employed in. It's just, I love being able to throw myself into my passion and spend a lot of time allotted to me to do so, and that's a really privileged position to be in. I've chatted about this before, about being a writing major and that privilege. I think it's different, especially like I think a lot of my American viewers, things might work differently in a sense, like because I know American education is a lot more expensive than Canadian, and so I can understand why it would be completely impractical for some Americans to get a writing degree. It's not that I don't want to be employed in writing, but it was not really like I didn't set out to be a writer. I already am one, so I didn't try to like make like a full-time living out of that for now. What do I not like about being a writing major? And please, I mean, actually I was gonna say please don't unsubscribe, but if you are one of these people, the male writers of the program, if any of you guys are in a writing program and you're women, or just not the male like writer, like capital M, capital W, you probably understand who I'm referring to. Even if you are like a male writer yourself, you may like understand where I'm coming from. And like, I mean male writer as in like capital, like M, capital W. They're like a specific archetype of writing majors. The next question is, what career paths do creative writing majors usually consider? I was just chatting about this. I don't know. I talked about this in my 5 things I learned from my writing degree so far video, which I will link, but I don't really know anything about like writing careers with like a degree, because in all honesty, like you don't need a writing degree to go into the field. I feel it has definitely already made me a much better, more confident writer with a lot more confidence and also resources to access for a potential writing career in the future. But you don't need a degree. Like, it's not a requirement. It's not like with like plumbing, for example, where you would need some sort of requirements to meet that job, which I don't know anything about, so maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you need requirements for that. But to be a writer, anybody can write anything. But I didn't go because I wanted a career in writing. I think a career in writing would be amazing, but that's not anything that I planned for. I have not planned like for a career. As like generally, I think some creative writing majors might go into like teaching, like at post-secondary level. I can't get any sort of teaching qualifications with my degree because it is not an English degree. I'm getting a fine arts degree, but there are some writing majors who can get like their MFA and then they can teach at the post-secondary level. I think all degrees equip you with skills that you're going to need in the workforce no matter what the degree is, but I think this also is really dependent on you. For example, for me, I know a lot of skills that I could throw myself into. The next question is, describe your short story writing process. What tends to inspire your short story concepts? My short story writing process is kind of a mess. I've written many short stories at this point. So that's 7, and I've written some flash fiction pieces, and I might be forgetting one. So I've like written a lot more short stories than I remember. I feel like a novice still when it comes to short fiction writing. Some people after 7 short stories already like are very comfortable with how to write short stories, but I still kind of fumble through it. Basically, my process is like get an idea, fumble with the muse, and then you're done. And what I mean by that is I think short fiction is all in the ideas. When you start writing more short fiction, you'll start to get more short fiction ideas. As a novelist, you can often tend to get loftier ideas that would require more space. Short fiction is hard because you need to know what to fit in a small space. It's not that you need to fit an entire novel in a short story. You need to understand what story will work in a short form. And that might be the hardest part about writing short fiction. I kind of wait for ideas. Sometimes I will try to push myself to get ideas, but I find the most organic short stories, the best short stories that I get are the ones that I sort of get on a whim. And so I kind of let it happen. Very pantser thing to say. When I get the idea, I'll sit down and I will kind of visualize, like again, writing as that soapstone metaphor. I can see that it's like a brick of soapstone, and I feel as I'm writing like I'm chipping away at it, and I write in a daze almost, that sort of chipping away daze. And maybe some of you kind of experience that too, but I immerse myself in this sculpting of words, and I really focus on that for short fiction. But I don't have much of a process. I know that's really unhelpful, but it's like I get an idea and then I write it, and sometimes it turns out to be a good short story. As for what tends to inspire your short story concepts, I watch a lot of true crime. True crime is something that I adore. I listen to hours of cases daily. I'd say about 3 hours, if not more cases daily. I would never like take a case and then like fictionalize it in my own work. I don't personally feel comfortable doing that. Elements from cases, some details from cases may appear or inform the work. My friends' works are amazing. So my sister is a stunning writer, and so whenever I read her work might not inspire a concept. It gets me in the mood of writing, and so if I want to get an idea, latching onto someone else's language and really feeling that ecstasy that like reading wonderful language can give you is a really good place to start with me when I want to get concepts. My friend Shaylin writes amazing short fiction too, and I can't leave a short story of hers without feeling sort of buzzed to write my own. And I absolutely never condone, because this has happened to me many times from different sources that have like taken concepts of mine or taken ideas of mine, and I never condone that. And I do think inspiration and copying needs to be talked a bit more about, but being inspired by my own friends' work is really wonderful for me. I'm able to sort of burrow into language, and so that helps with the concepts because it kind of fuels the root, and then the root kind of creates the sprouts, and the sprouts are like the ideas for me. I also really love music for short story concepts. I might not get a particular, like I might not use it as a prompt, but I might hear like a lyric that has like a word in it that might spark an idea. Just anything from my environment, kind of things that are surrounding me, they inspire my concepts. So I always kind of try to keep my writer brain on when I'm experiencing life in general so that I can kind of tuck away ideas as they come. The next question is, how do you think the writing community has changed in the years you've been a part of it? Tell us 3 things you like about it, right, for writeblr specifically. I think the writing community, I'll talk about this for both like Tumblr and YouTube, it's gotten a lot bigger. So I have been on YouTube watching AuthorTube from the beginning of probably its conception. I've been watching AuthorTube from about like 2014. It's gotten a lot bigger since then. There are a lot more AuthorTubers, more like kind of bigger channels. There used to only be like 3 or so big channels, but there are a few more. There's still like a handful, so it's still a really small community. But yeah, it's gotten bigger, and I've noticed that there are a lot more smaller channels too. And so that's awesome. If you're a smaller AuthorTuber, let me know, because same, I want to support you guys. I didn't really interact with people on Tumblr for like my first 2 or 3 years on there, so it's kind of hard to say for Tumblr, but I think it's gotten a lot more community oriented. People are more willing to engage with each other, reblog each other's work, kind of comment on each other's work, and sort of create like friendships on there. But I could be wrong because I don't really know that much about like previous Tumblr, even though I've been on the writeblr community for 5 years on there. For AuthorTube, because that's kind of what I'm more well versed in as well, it has gotten a lot wider, and I think with the increase of size there has also been like an increase of white AuthorTubers. I wish there was a little bit more diversity on AuthorTube, more so in like larger channels. Most of AuthorTube is composed of white women, and so I think kind of perhaps including more voices in the higher, like in the upper kind of tier channels, that would be awesome. I think it's also become a lot less on both platforms advice oriented and a lot more oriented on like personal process. So I see a lot more writing updates on Tumblr. I see a lot more writing of vlogs on YouTube, and I think we've moved a little bit away from like how-to videos and more on how I videos, which I think is like really cool. I also notice more people try to interact with smaller communities rather than the biggest channels or biggest Tumblr blogs, and I think that's also really awesome, sort of trying to support people who are smaller too. 3 things that I like about writeblr specifically, I wrote down here. Positives are the community. Interaction is like a lot of fun on Tumblr. You get to like reblog people, you get to message them or like comment on their work and like add yourself to tag lists. It's very interactive. There's also a broader range of writers at different levels, and it doesn't really matter what level you're at. There's not really, in my opinion, like a hierarchy or like a very select way people classify themselves on writeblr. I also love how nonchalant and easy it is for me to share my work. So the next question is, what do you think your writer brand is? Quirky stories about people who don't know how to communicate is very much my brand. There's sometimes religious imagery, girlhood, any sort of like relationship excavation in my short fiction, weird concepts, and I also like write with a lot of apathy, or characters who are very reflective, but perhaps not in the morally best ways. So morally ambiguous writing as well. The next question is, what are you most looking forward to in second year? I'm really excited for writing workshops. I found out who both my professors are. I'm doing 2 streams in fiction and poetry, which I'm really excited about. Obviously, I've been writing fiction for many years at this point. Poetry, I've been writing for about a year now, so not very, very long. Those are both genres that I'm really interested in. Of course, fiction. I can't wait for my fiction workshop. That's what I'm looking forward to the most. Fiction workshop is going to be lit. The next question is, do any of the fostered characters like singing? Is there a weird hobby they hide from others? So for the first part, do any of the fostered characters like singing? Yes. So first, Harrison, who is from Moth Work, loves singing. He's not the best singer, but he's not bad. He's kind of just like average and sometimes like gets out of key a little bit. He's not like fantastic at it, but he like has a lot of fun. So I think that's the most important part, that he's having a lot of fun while doing it. As for Lonan, who is his love interest, Lonan actually really does like singing. So Lonan is my boy. We're kind of similar in this way where we both probably sing on the DL. Like, I love singing, but won't do it in public. As for like Reeve, I've never thought about Reeve. I don't think Reeve can sing. I don't think she has like the inclination to sing to anything. I don't even think she like likes music. As for Foster also doesn't sing. He loves music. I think he would really like a lot of indie music, but he just isn't the kind of person who is ever inclined to sing anything. I don't think he's bad at singing, but he just doesn't do it. As for weird hobbies, the only person that has a weird hobby that they explicitly hide from people, Lonan holds his breath underwater and he likes to like practice holding his breath. Next question is, what project do you plan to work on after feeding habits? I'm not really sure. It's either going to be Houses with Teeth, which is fostered 7, or I'll just take a break from novels in general and work on some short fiction, or I will do The Sun Only Drowns Us, which is another adult literary fiction novel that I am trying to work on. The next question is, tell us about the times you had maximum fun drafting Moth Work. So I'm going to say drafting the first chapter. So there was no pressure at all for me when I was drafting the first chapter. I didn't know that this was going to be a book. I thought that Moth Work was going to be like a 5,000 word short story or something, but it ended up being a novel because I just expanded it. It was a lot of fun to write my boys working together. It opens with them like walking to this dark room that Lonan's father owns to burn it down, but then they find a picture of this woman that is wearing like Lonan's mother's jewelry, and they're like, oh, who is she? And they want to basically go and find her. And so it was kind of playful. Because at the time there was no pressure, I was not worrying about anything because it was like my for fun project. It was really freeing to write that first chapter. I've also really enjoyed writing the scenes with Eliza. Chapter 6, Holy Queen, where Lonan is kind of in this dissociative state, walking around when he like approaches a cathedral, was so much fun for me to write. That was like some of the best writing sessions I've ever had. Any scenes with Eliza are a lot of fun, especially toward the end. There is a chapter called Picking Ritual where Eliza and Harrison play a game of cards. It's not really a game, it's more like they're using subtext that isn't very subby, it's very overt to shade each other, and that one has a lot of fun dialogue in it. So also any like romantical vibes between Lonan and Harrison make me like squeal with joy. So those are always like the most fun for me to write. The next question is, what's your favorite animal? The answer is dogs. I love dogs. The next question is, how do you name your characters? Do you like coming up with last names? How do I name my characters? I always have to name a character before I write with them, unless it's like a short story and like the narrator has no name, like then most of the time like that's fine. But if I know that the character has a name, I need to name them. I can't just like have a placeholder. So I come up with names by just going on websites, usually for girls and like even for boys. Like I will search up like vintage names or like older style names, like classic names. I don't often come up with last names. It's very dependent on the project. Most short stories don't call for that, if they even call for a character's first name. The only characters of mine that have last names are the fostered characters, and I named them mostly out of necessity. I think it showed up in the story, but I don't often come up with last names. If I do, I will just like search up like unique last names and see what shows up. The next question is, what's your favorite season and why? I was just talking about this with my mom. Summer. I used to say fall, but I hate the cold. I can't handle cold. I don't like it. I don't want to be near it. Summer gets a bit hot and irritating and grueling, and then you're like stuck inside because you have no school, but it's sunny and it's warm. So like, you know, like the perfect summer days where it's cool, there's breeze, it's only like 24 degrees, there's no humidity. That's the best. The next question is, do you like drawing backgrounds for your art? I do not. I don't really draw backgrounds that often. I actually prefer when I'm doing digital art. If you didn't know, I am an artist too. I prefer just keeping the background plain because I'm not very good at backgrounds. Next question is, what would your fostered characters do if they were stuck in an elevator together? So Harrison would rock the boat. He would be the one to be like pressing all the buttons and like trolling on like the intercom thing and like jumping up and down and like scaring people. But then when he realized that people were getting freaked out or annoyed with him, he would like kind of stop and try to problem solve because he's very selfless. He likes getting things done. But first he would rock the boat. Reeve would start bitching. She would be cursing at the elevator. She'd be like, I told you guys we should take the stairs, even though she's probably the one who would whine if they had to climb on the stairs. But she wouldn't really be doing much. I think she would just kind of just stand there and be upset and yell at people, which is fine. I probably would do the same thing. Lonan, I think, is like the most used to being confined. So I feel like he might react okay if he was stuck in an elevator. However, I think the other people would really start irritating him because they'd look to him to solve the problem. Even though Harrison is probably the most capable of solving the problem, he's more concerned with like trolling everybody and like rocking the boat. So Lonan is the next best bet because he's like kind of the most logical out of all of them. He would try to be figuring out the situation. I think he'd be more irritated with like Harrison and Reeve. Foster would be panicking, but he would be the only person like genuinely making any sort of like change. Besides him and Lonan would probably be the only ones working together. But out of all of them, Lonan's the only one that would actually get them out of the elevator. Harrison would want to stay in there as long as possible to freak people out. Foster would be freaking out because like he might be late to an appointment or, you know, something bad might happen. Reeve would just be mad. And they would all probably be yelling at each other. Foster might like cry or something. The next question is, do you have any major phobias? Do they manifest consciously or subconsciously in your writing? I struggle in social situations, not because I don't like socializing. I love socializing. I find that I'm like an extrovert trapped in an introvert's body. I love socializing, but my body kind of betrays me and gets very like antsy and like jittery when I have to socialize. And so that gets a bit uncomfortable. I don't have any other phobias besides that, except for falling. I'm terrified of falling. I'm not scared of heights, but I'm scared of falling. So some of my characters definitely struggle like with social interaction. I don't usually pull on my own experiences, but they don't really manifest much in my writing. Next question is, tell us about the first thing you submitted to a literary magazine and the first thing that got accepted by a literary magazine. The first thing I submitted to a literary magazine is a poem called My Wolf Lives on the Windowsill. It was the first prose poem I had ever written. I wrote it in 20 minutes and I submitted it like the day after. That was the first thing that I submitted. And the first thing that got accepted by the literary magazine is a short story I wrote for my intro writing class called The Species is Dead. It is on Manila Review. I will link it in the description. It's actually already linked down there if you want to read it. The Species is Dead was the first thing that got accepted, but the second thing that I submitted. The first thing that I submitted was actually published. So that poem is published in Grain Magazine. Next question. How did you discover Garamond? How do you format your document? Garamond and I have a long history. I first heard about Garamond when I was 13. I had started formatting novels and I wanted a font. And so I looked for the one that was closest to the fonts in books. But E.B. Garamond came up as a substitute, a free substitute for another version of Garamond that you had to pay for. And so they were like, E.B. Garamond is pretty similar. So I downloaded E.B. Garamond and I used E.B. Garamond to format all of my books basically in the beginning, back when I was getting personal copies. None of them were for sale or anything. And I actually preferred E.B. for a while, but after realizing E.B. Garamond has ugly italics, and also after my friend Shaylin's insistence that Garamond is the best font, she's not wrong, it is the best font. I was like, let me just try this out, and I was converted. How do I format my document? Right now, I do Garamond like 12 or 13 point whatever, it doesn't really matter to me, double-spaced. I used to write in Times New Roman, but I've written too many academic papers in that font, so it kind of gives me bad vibes now, so Garamond is really nice in comparison. Next question. Hi Rachel, I'm such a big fan. How do you balance and manage writing with school? This summer I started getting serious with writing, but now I'm worried I won't have enough energy, let alone time. So my biggest advice for you would be to write whenever you can, whenever you feel you have the energy to, and not to pressure yourself, because I know it can seem like you want to create at the same pace that you would during the summer, but during the summer you have a lot more time, and so that makes a lot more sense as to why you'd be creating more. So don't beat yourself up too much. I found what helped the most when I was in school was writing like in between doing schoolwork or writing after I'd done schoolwork, or even just sort of slotting in half an hour whenever I could to write. Just write whenever you can on your commute, whether that's you waiting for your class to start, whether that's you taking like a break from writing your paper or something. So just try to find little spaces of time. I hope that helps. The next question is, what authors/works of writing inspire your writing? And so my number one inspiration, Emma Cline, who wrote The Girls. That's my favorite novel. Emma Cline has my heart. I wouldn't be the same writer I am today without reading that book. It really helped shape my literary style. I'm also a huge fan of Eliza Robertson. Her novel Demigods is stunning, and it also helped me form my style and love literary fiction. Emily Fridlin, who wrote History of Wolves, is also an icon. History of Wolves is beautifully crafted, and that truly helped me get a footing with my style as well. The most iconic in terms of authors, my friend Shaylin is a beautiful writer. She makes videos on here, as many of you probably already know. She writes the most beautiful things ever. I can't help but fall in love with everything she writes. She has such a gorgeous style. She understands story on a very complex level that not many people have that talent, and reading her work is an absolute pleasure. My twin sister Sarah is also a huge inspiration of mine. She's currently writing a novel right now called Animal Hour, and it is perfection. I love every single thing I read. Her sentences are so classy. She has such a good grasp on language and how to create such a crisp environment with the words she chooses. And both of them they mean a lot to me, both on a personal level and also writer level. The next question is, what is your opinion on social justice and literature? What do you think is the best way to incorporate activism into your art? Or is that for you like a separation of church and state? To be honest, I'm a little bit ignorant on this topic, like social justice and literature/social justice and art. I remember talking about this a few times, or having this like lectured at me like in a few of my university classes, but I'm a little bit ignorant on this topic. To be honest, I think if there's any way to showcase activism, whether that's through art, whether that's through speech, whatever, I think that's great. The next question is, have you been reading any litmags lately? If so, would love to know which ones you're digging. I'm the worst at reading things. I'm really trying to get better at it. But my favorite magazines, I love The Puritan and I love Manila Review. The next question is, do you ever see yourself working on a project with Sarah that we would ever get to read? So Sarah's my twin sister, like I've mentioned before. We haven't talked about this. We have never had any ideas to write a joint project together, but never say never. The next question is, when you're low on inspiration/motivation, what do you do? Where do you go to find it? So the honest answer on what do I do when I lose motivation is I don't do anything. I feel bad. I tunnel in on myself. Sometimes I cry. I feel frustrated. Honestly, I feel like a lot of people have good answers for that, and I just don't, because that's genuinely how I feel. When I feel low on motivation for writing, it's the worst feeling in the world, and I kind of let myself feel that for a bit. To go and find it is another thing. And sometimes when I'm done kind of wallowing in my sadness, I will make a conscious effort. So the first thing that I do to find motivation is I listen to my work in headphones, or sometimes I'll listen to it out loud. And so Word has a text-to-speech feature where you can just get the robot to read to you, and things out loud sound a lot better. And so I find having my work read to me makes me like kind of be a bit more objective toward it, not be so mean to the work, and sort of move away from any sort of feelings I'm having. For example, if I'm feeling low on motivation because I feel like my last scene kind of ran me into a rut, listening to the work can kind of put me back in the framework of that flow and get me back into it. I may also listen to music or read short stories from writers I love, or read like a paragraph or something from a novel that I love, for example. So the next question is, how do you like to drink coffee? I don't drink coffee all that much, but if I do drink coffee, I like to do double, like very Canadian, like 2 cream, 2 sugar, not very sweet. Next question, do you think you'll always write the same genres, or do you want to experiment with many different genres? So I write, like I said, primarily literary fiction, adult, and the thing I love about literary fiction is that it kind of allows you to do that. It allows you to jump between genres because it's kind of conventionless. You don't really have to stick to a particular set of rules. And that's why I love litfic, because it kind of lets me already do that. I never say never. I might write genre fiction. Might write like sci-fi. I might write fantasy. I might write something in a very particular genre. But the reason I love literary fiction is because it already kind of allows me to do that. I can incorporate magic. I can incorporate horror. I can incorporate so many different things in my literary style. Do you have a certain type of character you like to write the most? Apathetic people who are morally ambiguous. My favorite. Are the books you like to read and the books you like to write very similar or surprisingly different? They're very similar. I have like a very specific style that I like to read, and my style is kind of similar to that. And the topics are mostly around like girlhood, and that's kind of similar to what I write, in relationships, and that's kind of also similar to what I write. What common writing advice do you disagree with most? The first is to use screen or like TV and movies as examples for fiction dialogue. I don't think that's a very good idea, because I think screenwriting dialogue and fiction dialogue serve different things, and using dialogue that works on the screen may not work in fiction and vice versa. So I don't think that's very good advice. I think it's from a good place, because screenwriters are awesome at dialogue, but be careful with that and sort of critically think about the dialogue that you're consuming if it's from TV and movies, because there are different functions, in my opinion, to the two types. The second, you must outline. Some people are very like hardcore down your throats about outlining, and to those people, I feel like those people might be like a little bit maybe insecure with their own processes. Like, just like worry about your own self, you know, like don't worry about what other people are doing. If outlining doesn't work for you, don't do it. If pantsing doesn't work for you, outline. Like, it's fine. If you want to do both, do both. It's totally fine. I do both, and I call myself a pantser. Sometimes I outline, sometimes. So it's like, don't get too caught up in like the little stuff like that. The next question is, what would you say is something you do as a hobby that we wouldn't expect? I already hinted at this, but I watch a lot of true crime. I don't know if that counts as a hobby. So my camera died, so I'm gonna finish the video and answer the last few questions on my phone. Yeah, I don't really do much research on my own into crime cases, but I do listen to a lot of them. I do reflect a lot on crime cases, and I'm really interested in true crime in general. So the next question is, do you know of any places to get your book printed without publishing? So I've done this through CreateSpace, which doesn't exist anymore, and Blurb. So Blurb is where I would go now. The without publishing part, you might want to do research onto that on your own. Some people believe that when you have an ISBN, your book is published, which means all of my books are published, which I don't think so, because there's no public distribution. They were all like proof copies, and there was never any like revenue made from that. But if I were to go, I would go with Blurb. But do your own research into that, because some people might consider that published, some might not. The next question is, hi Rachel, I'm usually pretty quiet in the comments, but I've loved your videos for months now, and I love your chaotic energy. Thank you, that's so nice. Are you into stationery/pens/journals? If so, what are your faves? I personally love fountain pens, but they're expensive and smudge. I'm not really. I've always been kind of like a computer gal. I love typing. I've always wanted to. I've always wanted to be one of those people who loves and uses notebooks and like journals and does cool stuff like that, but I often just kind of like flake on like journaling and stuff, but maybe one day in the future. The next question is, what tiny nuggets of ideas do you have for potential future novels or short stories? So I have an idea about a short story about a woman who commits a murder on the morning a group of children are coming to visit her blackberry farm. I've also been toying with this idea about these cousins with a bit of a bizarre relationship kind of reunite after one of them gets into a pretty life-altering accident. I've also keep getting this recurring idea about bodies that keep washing up on the shore. I got this when I was like on a beachfront, so I am trying to find a story that will work in. I've also been working on a short story called Blink Twice for Final Judgment, which is actually a story that's about a year in the making. It's essentially about this young woman who, I think, for now, visits her childhood home on the 10th anniversary of her twin sister's death. So her sister died when she was 14, when they were 14, and so she's 24 now, and she meets the strange family that lives there, and they may or may not be a cult. That's pretty fun. I've been working on that the last few days, and I hope to finish it soon. But those are what I've been working on lately. The next question is, I love your channel. My question is, as a pantser, how do you manage bigger projects and stay inspired? As a pantser, it's very important you timeline. I've been keeping up like 9 books of timelines in my head. Don't do that. It gets very confusing. Write lots of notes. Keep things pretty organized, even though like it's mostly all happening in your brain. So managing bigger projects, I would highly recommend just doing a lot of note taking, just taking it little by little. In terms of like scenes and moving through scenes, sort of understanding an action a character can do that will move the book forward in some sort of way. It doesn't have to move the plot forward. Sometimes that can be a bit too much to ask. Just like moving the book forward, whether that's like moving a character forward, like developing somebody, developing a relationship. Make sure like a scene is serving something in the story. To stay inspired, again, just like take the writing in chunks. Don't try to overwhelm yourself with like tons of writing at once. Pantsing can require like a lot of like mental exertion because you're coming up with the story and you're writing it at the same time. So just take it in slower chunks. I find that slowing things down helps a lot. And also like editing as I go, just cleaning up things. Like if I know that I made an error like on the timeline, if I know that I made a consistency issue, I'll just go and fix it instead of like leaving it all to the end. And then it becomes less overwhelming as I sort of chip away as I go. And the last question for this video is, what are you looking forward to about going back to school and what are you most nervous about? Which is a nice question to end off on. What am I most looking forward to about going back to school? Like I said, I'm really looking forward to my writing workshops and being in a bit of a routine. I have been home since March. In general, I don't love when school starts back up, but I will get into the routine of things and be pretty grateful for that. What am I most nervous about? I am just nervous about the stress, honestly. I'm not very nervous about getting feedback or anything. I'm actually really excited for like getting critiques. I love getting critiques on my work, but just nervous is just like, I don't want to be stressed, you know, and I know I will be because you can't not go into a school year having some sort of stress because it's kind of a natural part of being a student, but I'm not prepared for that. It's kind of like balancing that workload and also maybe my personal writing. I didn't really balance my personal writing and my school writing at all last year. When first semester started, I was writing Moth Work and I didn't write Moth Work for the entire semester. So about like 4 months. And so I'd like to like write a little bit more of my personal stuff if I can, but I'm not gonna like force myself or anything. But most thing that I'm nervous about is definitely the impending stress. Anyway, that's gonna be the end of this video. It has been a long one, so I'm going to sign off. Thank you guys if you participated and asked a question, and I will be sure to do a Q&A in the future. So if you have more questions, I will definitely do one sometime soon. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!